Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask-strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 1064 for July 7th, 2024. Coming up in a few minutes.
What we do as a collective society is we make assumptions about areas that we don't know. So coming into Lynchburg, I would have never thought that this is the story that I would have found. I would never thought that there would be this story of love, honor, and respect among Black people and white people.
Uncle Nearest founder Fawn Weaver has just published her latest book, Love and Whiskey, which tells the story of Jack Daniel and Nearest Green, along with Fawn's first-hand experiences researching that story in and around Lynchburg, Tennessee. It's also the origin story of Uncle Nearest Whiskey, one of the fastest-growing whiskey brands on the market. My conversation with Fawn Weaver is coming up in a few minutes on WhiskyCast In-Depth. I'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, Behind the Label, and much more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
Gabriel Cardarella from Jewers here. The 2024 U.S. Open Championship may have ended, but you can still get your hands on the whiskey created to honor it. The new Jewers 19-Year-Old Champions Edition. Trust me, a whiskey you don't want to miss. More details coming up.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast. Robin Redbreast? You may have seen me around. Face label, label face. Yeah, that's the one. I'm now contractually obligated to be their spokesbird. Yeah, my agent didn't read the small print. Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's get started with the week's news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. It's been 41 years since the historic Dallas Dhu Distillery in Speyside closed its doors and became a museum of distilling. Now there's an agreement in place to reopen the distillery. Historic Environment Scotland, which owns the site, and ACO Limited have agreed to resume whiskey production at Dallas Dhu, using as much of the original equipment as possible. ACO Managing Director Edward Odom has been working on the project for nearly a decade.
It seems like an eon ago now, but the idea was there. There was this beautiful site sitting there, underused, just a few mannequins, it was a kind of dusty old museum setting, not a sight or smell or anything relating to whiskey being made. So I approached them initially to get the site with the idea of just putting whiskey into the site, bringing some barrels, at least the maturation warehouses would be put to good use. And almost like a throwaway clause, or throwaway comment, I said, oh, and by the way, should you ever want to bring back whiskey production here, look no further. We'd be delighted, kind of thing.
We'll have more with Edward Odom on next week's episode. There's still a lot to do before distilling can resume at Dallas Dhu, including an application for water rights and an updated feasibility study on the existing equipment. In other news, the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame announced its class of 2024 this week. New Riff Distilling founder Ken Lewis is this year's winner of the Parker Beam Lifetime Achievement Award, not only for establishing New Riff 10 years ago, but for his longtime ownership of the Party Source liquor store in Newport, Kentucky. He was at the forefront back then of pushing for legislative changes to allow Sunday liquor sales in Kentucky. The other inductees include 93-year-old Elmer Lucille Allen, the first black chemist at Brown-Forman and in the bourbon industry, Angels Envy Visitor Center manager Dee Ford, Kentucky Peerless Distilling founder Corky Taylor, and the late Peter Lofton, who founded the Bardstown Bourbon Company. The induction ceremony will be on September 10th in conjunction with the Kentucky Bourbon Festival. Whiskey industry leaders are welcoming the change in leadership in the UK, with Labour's landslide win in Thursday's general election. Keir Starmer is the new Prime Minister, and last year he promised to, quote, back Scotch producers to the hilt. Scotch Whisky Association CEO Mark Kent wants to hold Starmer to that promise, starting with the new administration's first budget later this year and fairer tax treatment for whiskey makers. His goals also include a free trade deal with India and protecting the whiskey industry from tariffs in the U.S. and other key global markets. Last October, we talked with Whiskey House Distillery founder David Mandel in episode 1027 of WhiskyCast. At the time, final construction work was still underway at the distillery in Elizabethtown, Kentucky. This week, Whiskey House started production for the first time. The distillery will focus on contract production for brand owners and will not have brands of its own or a visitor's center. Whiskey House opens with an annual production capacity of 7 million proof gallons, with plans to double that in 2027. New whiskeys of note this week. The Balvenie has added 2 new expressions to its Stories range, a 14-year-old American bourbon barrel matured single malt, and an 18-year-old French Pinot cask finish. The 14-year-old will carry a recommended retail price of $115 a bottle, while the 18-year-old will sell for around $400. Lafroig has unveiled the second expression in its Elements series, which explores different experiments with distilling. Elements 2.0 took the usual 55-hour fermentation period for Lafroig's mash and doubled it to 115 hours, which emphasized the fruitier notes while not affecting the peatiness. It's available with a suggested retail price of $165 a bottle. Ardbeg is releasing the second edition in the Ardbeg Anthology collection. The 14-year-old Unicorn's Tale is matured in a combination of Madeira and ex-bourbon casks, and it'll be available starting July 15th. There's no word on pricing. Glenallachie is out with a new Sauterne wine cask finish. The 12-year-old single malt is available for £67.99 a bottle. Douglas Lang & Company is releasing a new limited edition Rock Island blended malt finished in tequila casks. Rock Island blends together whiskeys from the islands of Arran, Islay, Jura, and Orkney, and the tequila casks add a fresh citrusy character to the whiskey. It'll be available globally for around £65 a bottle. And Coach-Built Whiskey has teamed up with Williams Racing to launch a new series of whiskeys honoring the F1 team's heritage. The first whiskey in the series is an 18-year-old blended Scotch that will sell for £230 a bottle at the Coach-Built website. Finally, we have several updates for tourists visiting Scotland this summer. Loch Lomond has partnered with 10 whiskey bars between Glasgow and Troon to create a whiskey and golf trail ahead of this month's Open Championship at Royal Troon. The bars include the Bon Accord and the Pot Still in Glasgow, and each bar will have a bespoke drink featuring one of Loch Lomond's whiskies between July 12th and 21st. Rosebank Distillery has been named a 5-star visitor attraction by Visit Scotland, and Dewar's Aberfeldy Distillery has added a new experience for visitors that includes a warehouse visit and sensory education. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at WhiskyCast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Let's check the calendar now and see what's happening around the world of whiskey. Julio's Liquors in Westboro, Massachusetts has a Widow Jane tasting this Wednesday night and a Lafroig tasting on the 17th. The Kensington Wine Market in Calgary, Alberta has an introduction to bourbon tasting coming up on the 11th. Belfast Whiskey Week gets underway on July 19th and runs through the 27th with events around Belfast, Northern Ireland. The Whiskey Show Canberra is on July 20th in Canberra, Australia, and Sagamore Spirit Distillery's next Whiskey on the Waterfront party is that same day in Baltimore, Maryland. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendars at WhiskyCast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
A thoughtful gift is hard work. What you need is a go-to multi-purpose gift for all occasions. A bottle of Redbreast can say, "Enjoy every minute, they grow up so fast." Oh. And equally nails, "Apologies for the back pain, I should have just hired a moving company."
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Lagavulin and the Classic Malts lineup. Uncle Nearest Tennessee Whiskey has been one of the fastest-growing whiskey brands in recent years. The The story of how Nearest Green taught Jack Daniel how to make whiskey as an enslaved man, then became Jack's trusted friend and colleague after emancipation, has caught on with whiskey lovers. Fawn Weaver has spent the last 8 years studying the Nearest and Jack story, along with creating the Uncle Nearest brand, and she shares the stories of both in her new book, Love and Whiskey. I spent some time the other day with Fawn on a Zoom call in the middle of a very busy book tour. So how long did it take you to write this book?
So it began the first chapters were written in the fall of 2016. And then Uncle Nearest began to take off. And Lord knows there is so much work involved in building a whiskey brand. And so I kept trying to go back to it. And it was pretty, impossible to do that and to do the research and to write simultaneously. And so I did what I think most people at this time are doing is I brought in Bob Woodward's right hand and said, okay, bring in your researchers, re-interview everybody I've interviewed. And so it was very much a collaborative thing, but it took 8 full years. Well, seven full years.
Well, whiskey takes a long time to mature. Why not a book?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Absolutely.
How's the book tour going?
It's going incredible. I could use some sleep, but we were at Birmingham yesterday, and literally they shut down the second floor of the airport for us, which I've never seen that before. So that was pretty extraordinary. The airport here and Hudson Booksellers put together something quite extraordinary here, and then we were in Chicago yesterday, and I'm headed to Indianapolis once I get off this with you. So it has been really great. There's never been a book tour like this where all of the questions come unfiltered from the audience. So none of them are screened, and we're not looking at it and giving the mic to someone who we think will ask a soft question. Literally, it's a pass the mic, and however many questions are able to be asked in that 2.5 hours. Then I ask them or I answer them. And so it's been extraordinary because no cities have asked the same question, which Victoria and I were pretty astounded by that. We were talking about it last night. Every city has its own vibe. Every city has its own energy and thoughts. And so they ask questions based on what's important to them. And no city has asked the same questions.
Give me an example. What have you been asked?
Oh, I'm asked everything. So let's see. Last night, and I'm terrible with this because it's such a natural conversation that I don't really hold on to it. I just know whether or not I've been asked the question twice. Let me see if I can think of a question. I don't even know. I don't know. Every city, the questions are generally like last night, for instance. Almost every question was about Uncle Nearest, meaning the brand. So here last night, it was a huge room full of people that were fans of the brand. And so you had a lot of questions about our growth and how we were able to do it without having celebrity endorsements, how we were able to expand now into cognac, so it was very much so an Uncle Nearest premium whiskey branded type of conversation, questions about the building of the distillery and that type of thing. It was, and the first question though, that was actually asked of both Victoria and I was in regard to our families, in regard to our fathers. And so that was the first time that anyone had asked us about our fathers. And so that's how yesterday kicked off. But yesterday was very much so a lot of Uncle Nearest, the brand fans. I would say in Chicago, most of the questions were about my life. A lot of the questions were about my life personally and how I became who I became, how I was drawn to the story, why I was drawn to the story, what drew me to the story. Chicago had quite a bit of a theme, but if I go to Washington, D.C., maybe because it was in the press club, there was a lot of conversation about my military tour and the number of bases that I've visited and why I've visited those bases and And so every city has had a different theme of questions.
Let's start with your childhood. You grew up the daughter of teetotaling parents.
Yes. My mother is still a teetotaler. My father's passed away, and he was a teetotaler when he passed away. And my mother is now. She really wishes that Nearest Green was making lemonade. She actually said that. So that so that's not hyperbole. That literally is her quote.
But you wound up on the streets at an early age too, as a teenager, because of conflicts with your parents.
Yeah, it was, so for African American families, as a general rule, we tend to think we're now changing that, which is great. But our parenting style historically has been authoritarian, and it makes sense, right? We were brought to this country, and those who were over us were authoritarian in terms of how they dealt with us. And so it's, shouldn't be odd that that is the style that we picked up in terms of raising our kids. And authoritarian is essentially do what I say because I said to do it, and don't ask any questions. Well, I was always an inquisitive child, always. And I was always a child who challenged everything. So even growing up where, I get in trouble in school because they give you all these novels to read. I had zero interest in any novel. The moment I knew that a story was not true, I didn't want to spend the time reading it because I had an entire Encyclopedia Britannica. And so I rather just sit there on the floor, cross-legged, and just literally thumb through the pages and learn about all the things that were in the encyclopedia. That is what excited me. To this day, I don't read novels. To this day, I only read nonfiction, and I've been that way my entire life. But to me, that's just something that is a choice to me. That's not something to be challenged. That's not something that is a challenge. But if you're growing up and your teachers are saying, "Hey, you have to read this novel," and you're refusing to read it, you get in trouble with your parents. And so it's not that I was doing anything, like to this day, I've never tried drugs. I wasn't promiscuous. It wasn't that I was doing things that a parent would be unhappy about. It is simply that I challenged everything. And they'd say, you need to do this. And I'd say, okay, why? and 15 years of that. And my parents had pretty much had enough of it and said, listen, this is our house. We pay for this house and we're your parents. And so you either do it our way or you need to leave. And so I chose to leave. So it wasn't some type of contentious, like it wasn't even an argument when I left. It was definitely a decision of you have two choices. You can either do things the way that we do them and we're not interested in your constant challenges, or you can leave and figure out how to do this on your own. So I decided to leave and figure out how to do it on my own.
And you certainly did that.
Yes, I did.
The book almost seems to be as much about race as it does about whiskey and the Uncle Nearest story. But it comes to me at a different angle than most stories have seen about race and most books have seen about race, in that there's a lot of tolerance here and a lot of diversity that wasn't present in much of the South.
Oh, I can't speak for the rest of the South. I can only speak for the portion of the South that I've now studied through and through. And I think that what we do as a collective society is we make assumptions about areas that we don't know. So coming into Lynchburg, I would have never thought that this is the story that I would have found. I would never have thought that there would be this story of love, honor, and respect among Black people and white people. It's Victoria Edie Butler will tell you at 62 years old, she'll tell you that she would have never wanted to grow up in any town other than Lynchburg. And when you talk to the African-American elders there in Lynchburg, they will tell you the same. And there's so many of them that are still there that are in their 90s. And they would tell you they would not have grown up anywhere but Lynchburg, Tennessee. But Victoria will also tell you she never experienced racism a day in her life till she left Lynchburg. And so we have this, we look at the coastal states and the Midwestern states and we try to compare it to the South and say that, they had it so much better. And I'm not sure. I think that we lump everything together and say, the South was one particular way. And having now lived in this story, I'm not buying it. I don't know what the other towns are like, but I do know through and through what Lynchburg was like. And so I'm going to hold on to that particular one. And then somebody else can do the studies of the other cities. But I think that we tend to think in black and white, and we do not leave enough room for the nuance. We don't leave enough room for the fact that even in the midst of terrible situations, good people can rise up. And that's what we saw here.
But you also had a lot of fear.
I'm coming from California. So what I learned about the South, and I don't know that I had a lot of fear. I don't know that that's in the book anywhere. I certainly had trepidation about coming into Lynchburg, Tennessee, or I should say my husband had trepidation about coming into Lynchburg. I didn't have any fear coming into Lynchburg. I had nothing. There's only one situation where I had any fear, and that was definitely coming in and a story that's in the book with Chuck Baker, and I simply didn't understand something, and it ended up being really, really funny because I had my assumptions of what rednecks are and placed that assumption of him. And the reality is most people in the world aren't really concerned about what people think about them. They're concerned about what they think people think of them. And in that situation, it was certainly the case of I had an idea of what this person thought of me versus what the reality was, which was enormously positive. But I didn't have fear coming into this at all. My husband was not excited about coming to a town called Lynchburg, that's for sure.
And you talk a lot about Keith in the book.
I do. I talk a lot about Keith all the time because this year will be married 21 years, and he is my partner in all things, everything. And so it's really hard to even talk about anything that I'm doing because Keith is always by my side.
Yet he was kind of questioning the whole whiskey thing at the start, right?
Oh, absolutely. He'll tell you, and he said it at one of the, or he has said it many times, that if it were for him, Uncle Nearest would not exist. He was trying to shut that down very early on into this process. We had a great life in Los Angeles before coming to Lynchburg, and it was not a stressful one. And so coming into an industry that we were not familiar with, an industry that historically nobody survives, forget about race, forget about gender, like nobody survives coming into this thing. And so he just had no interest whatsoever. So absolutely, if it were up to him, we would still be in our beautiful house in Old Agora, and we would have a much simpler life. But it's also the case that if it weren't for him, Uncle Nearest actually wouldn't exist because of how much he has done to contribute to it.
Including actually sort of being the face of the brand when you were just trying to get started and couldn't get people to return your calls.
Absolutely. Being the face of the brand within the industry, because they, so early on, and it is still the case to this day, my entire leadership team, well, I guess it's not the case because now Keith is the CEO of Nearest Green Distillery, but for up until the point that changed last year, every single person in my leadership team for Uncle Nearest were women. And so coming into it, I had my head of whiskey operations was a woman, and my head of sales was a woman. And so they're making phone calls. I'm making phone calls. We're trying to get distributors. We're trying to get bottles. We're trying to source liquid, all the different things that we need, trying to secure distributors. And nobody is returning our phone calls. And we were all experiencing this separately, but didn't realize we were each experiencing it. So once Sherry and Kate both shared with me that separately, that they were having this experience, and I knew I was having this experience, I reached into Keith and I said, hey, babe, I just want to try out an experiment. I have a feeling that people in this industry just aren't used to hearing a woman on the other line, or if they are, not taking her seriously because one hasn't succeeded. So why even waste the time? And so I said, I'm going to send you an email And with every person who Kate, Sherry, and I have been trying to call, and I'm going to give you a synopsis of what we need from each one. And if you can reach into them and just tell them you have a new whiskey company coming out and Uncle Nearest, and ask them the information. And in every single instance where we had been trying to reach in for weeks, in some instances more than a month, and weren't getting calls back, Keith either got through immediately when he called, or they called him back by the end of the day. And at some point in every single one of those calls, because my husband is really a really nice guy, really amazing human being. And so, I see why people are drawn to him for sure. But in every single one of those calls, by the end of the call, they'd go, "Hey, do you drink beer? Do you want to get together for a beer?" Or they'd say, "Do you golf? Do you want to get together? You want to join us for a game?" So yes, very early on, we discovered that Remington Steele was a very smart way to come into this industry, where if it was anybody within the industry, he was the person who was having the conversations.
Does that frustrate you to this day?
Didn't frustrate me then, doesn't frustrate me now. The way I am not wired to be bothered by stuff like that. I look at that as a problem of the person on the other side, not as my personal problem. And so that situation didn't bother me for 2 seconds, because I looked at it and thought, okay, well, we needed more help anyway. So now Keith can deal with all these calls that are in relation to internally in the industry, and I can focus on our marketing, PR, and sales strategy, which is going to be really, really difficult breaking into this industry. And so I actually looked at it as an absolute benefit. It also allowed me to build this company completely flying under the radar, because everyone looking at me was looking at me as a historian. Nobody was looking at me as any type of powerhouse. They were looking at me as, oh, how cute. So for me, I loved it. And I thought, man, they're going to let me build this whole thing under the radar. Done. And so that's what I did. So I was never bothered by it then. To this day, it has never bothered me.
And you built this whole empire under the noses of Brown-Forman without them ever finding out.
Well, it wasn't an empire. It wasn't an empire. What I did during the 2016 and the first early months of 2017 was really lay the foundation, lay out the entire marketing plan, get the first distributors. Obviously, we sourced our juice coming into this, and so branding, marketing, all the rest of that stuff, absolutely did all of it. It was quite surprising, because I thought that they knew. And I thought that they knew because obviously you file a trademark, that's public, anybody can search it. And they had, as they shared with me back then, like 23 trademark attorneys or something like that. And so I thought for sure somebody would have some type of alert on the name Nearest. As though I never actually thought that what we were doing was a secret, just how we were doing it, the level that we were doing it, when we were doing it, the marketing, all that. I knew that that's the part I was keeping under wraps, but I never thought that they didn't know, because two things. Number one, our labels, right? Labels are public. They're easy to search. Anytime Uncle Nearest files a label, it just happened weeks ago. When we file a label, there's always someone who then takes the label and turns it into a social media post and says a new bottle is coming out. And so not in a million years did I think that Brown-Forman didn't know that it was coming. I just thought they didn't know when it was coming, how it was coming, or the way we were going to be approaching it.
How's that relationship today? You talk about in the book about some issues that we'd never discussed before with Brown-Forman. Yep. How's that relationship today?
It's good. And I'd never discussed it with anybody in the press. And the reason is because people take things and turn it into 160 characters. And all of a sudden there is a storyline. If you think about how we even all came to know this story, is that the article in 2016 by Clay Risen, that the headline was Jack Daniels embraces a hidden ingredient, help from a slave, and then it has a photo. Well, nothing in that article ever even alluded to Jack being a slave owner or stealing the recipe and hiding the slave, but somehow that's the story that went around the world in 160 characters. And so dealing with the nuance of the relationship with Brown-Forman, I never had any conversation in the press with that, because I wasn't going to allow people to take that out of context. People needed to have the entire story to ensure that Jack Daniel was not harmed in it. His legacy, the brand, it was very important to me, and it still is to this day. When I see them do things, and I'll call them on it. When I see them do things that I think could hurt the brand, I'll actually share, because to me, the Jack Daniel's brand continuing to grow and dominate whiskey around the world is personally important to me, because he was such an extraordinary person. And so I wasn't going to allow things that executives within that company were doing to try to harm Uncle Nearest, to try to harm the brand. I wasn't going to allow that to trickle onto Jack Daniel, the brand. And so now that the book has, people are able to get the full context of what was going on in that company, which was essentially a civil war. You had about half of the company and half of the leadership who believed that this story was actually beneficial to them. And you can look at their stock and know that that's true. If you go back and you pull up their stock from, I did my first interview July 19th, 2017. If you go back and you look at their stock from 2007 to the time I did that interview in 2017, you will see a line that looks almost flat. It's not that it wasn't growing, but it was growing at such a small amount that the line itself looks flat on the graph. July 26, 2017, after doing 7 days of nonstop interviews, you see that line hockey stick for the first time. And it's continued to rise. And so you had people in that company paying attention to that and going, wait, no, this story isn't hurting us. For the first time, people are seeing that Jack Daniel isn't just a brand, he's actually a man. And not only is he a man, he's a good man. And he's a great American story. He did it right. And so all of a sudden, he is being separated out of the pack from all these other bourbon companies and all these men that lead these bourbon companies that are on the labels, because now people are seeing him as an incredible American. And so you had half of the company who are looking at their stock and going, just let the woman keep talking. And then you had the other half that was bothered by the fact that they could not control the narrative that I was in the press every day, and that the story was so closely related to theirs, and that they were accustomed to being very competitive with every brand in the marketplace, including other whiskey brands within their house. And so you had this competitiveness, and they just hated the fact that Uncle Nearest was a brand. And so they looked at us as competition, and they looked at it doing to us what they try to do with all competition. And so you had this going on internally, and I just stayed out of the fray. I was like, we're going to build this. They're going to work this out. One side is going to win. Now, ultimately, the side that won was the side that supported us, and the side that believed that the story of Nearest Green is a part of their history. It's a good part of their history, and it should remain as a integral part of their story. That's the side that won. That's who still remains. All the people who were trying to throw grenades, which you find out in the book, and all the rest of that, they're no longer there. They're at other companies throwing grenades at somebody. But our relationship with Brown-Forman now is great. We have Spirits on the Rise. We have the Nearest and Jack Advancement Initiative, the not-for-profit alliance to diversify our industry. And so whenever we have conversations, it's never about Uncle Nearest. It's never about Jack Daniels. It's always about the Nearest and Jack Advancement Initiative. And we'll announce more recently that in the very near future, we will announce that we have finally gotten the Nearest Green Academy of Distilling at Motlow College, and that 2-year accredited program. It has now gone through every single step of the way. The House signed off on it, the Senate signed off on it, the governor signed off on it. So that's coming down the pipeline very quickly, and we're doing that together.
I was about to ask how that was coming along.
Mm-hmm. Boy, I tell you, the American education system, the amount of red tape, because we had to write the curriculum. So Melvin Keebler from Jack Daniel and Sherry Moore on our side wrote all of the curriculum, but then we have to hire the professor to teach it, and then we are originally, the school was going to be at Motlow, and the thought process was to build out a distillery there, but then they ultimately decided they wanted it to be hands-on. So that is that classroom and all of that is being built out at Nearest Green Distillery. And so it was a lot of it was a lot of red tape, a lot of red tape. The number of approvals that we've had to go through. I began working on this even before we began the Nearest and Jack Advancement Initiative. I began working on this with the president of Motlow College back in 2019. It has taken 5 years to get through all the red tape, but we've done it and we did it together. So we're excited that will begin next year, and we'll officially announce that pretty soon.
And you're announcing another cohort of students for the Nearest and Jack Advancement Initiative too, right?
I don't know that we will. We are looking at that internally and really refining the Nearest and Jack Advancement Initiative, because what we have found to be the most helpful to those in the industry is our Spirits on the Rise. That has turned into, that's not something that was ever a part of that wasn't something that was ever a part of what we were planning to do. But Catherine Jerkins, our chief business officer, and on their side, Jamie Butler, they came up with this idea of the Spirits of the Rise and bringing together, if you are a person of color who has founded a spirit company, literally for 2 days, both of our campuses, we open it up and we bring in every heavy hitter possible. We bring all of the gatekeepers from behind the gates. And so the heads of CEOs and COOs of control states are there interacting for 2 days straight. Like literally, you have the CEOs and heads of sales for all the top distributors. Well, not all of them, because there's one particular distributor that I never invite, but you literally have the entire industry coming together to rally around these people of color. And then we build out this huge brand fair in which each of these folks are able to pitch their brands to national accounts, and like big national accounts like Fridays and Hyatt. And it's really everything that I wish that we had coming into this industry. Investors, there's both of our Spirits on the Rise have had at least 50 investors, angel investors, that could write checks for any person who was ready for that. And so we've now done that 2 years in a row. It's a lot of work. It's very expensive for us to do, and it's a lot of work. And so I think that we're going to begin kind of consolidating our efforts behind that and the Nearest Green Academy of Distilling. So yes. And then you also have ACSA came up with the STEP program, which is very, very similar to what we were already doing. And so we might just let them kind of run with that piece of it. And we will continue to do the Spirits on the Rise and Nearest Green Academy of Distilling. That hasn't been decided, but I believe that that's the direction we're going in to be most effective in our industry.
And you're still donating a portion of sales to the Nearest Green Foundation to help members of the Green family go to college. Any success stories there?
Well, yeah, actually, we were talking about that last night. That was one of the questions that came up here in, where am I right now? Birmingham. That did come up here in Birmingham. And yeah, we had one graduate recently, summa cum laude, and is now a medical assistant, is going to go on to medical school. We have one who is now doing really well in PR, but she graduated with honors from University of Tennessee. And then we paid for her to get her master's at Auburn University. But we have every single person coming out, because one of the requirements is they must maintain at least a 3.0 GPA. And so it's, they're like, well, heck, if we're going to maintain 3.0, we might as well go for summa cum laude. So we've got a lot of them graduating with Greek letters. And we're really, really proud of that. And they're going out in the world and getting really great jobs and doing extraordinarily well. And at some point, hopefully we'll be able to convince them all to come back into Shelbyville and work for the family business. But for now, they're out there, they're getting great experience, they're being paid well, and they're getting extraordinary educations.
How does it feel to you to know that you've changed their lives?
I don't think I've changed their lives. I think God has changed their lives. I just am a person who does what I believe I'm supposed to do. And so if it's up to me, I think humans by nature, we're a little selfish. We come into this world pretty selfish. And so I can't say that it is me. So I guess I don't look at it that way. I don't take credit for having changed their lives. The only thing I can say is that I believe that God set this up the way that it is, and the only thing that I did was do my part in this. But really, it's him that, for whatever reason, this particular family means a lot to him, and I'm grateful that I got to be a part of this.
No, I want to ask you about the cognac business because you've branched out into cognac.
Yeah.
So why branch out into cognac?
I think it is, number one, it's very smart. Most people don't understand the cognac business. So I decided to branch into cognac when Jay-Z sued Bacardi. And the reason is because for a very, very, very long time, there have been four cognac houses that have controlled almost the entire business. A little bit like here in America, we've got our six spirit conglomerates that control almost everything. Well, in cognac, you've got four cognac houses. You have Hennessy, Remy, Courvoisier, and Martell that have controlled everything for a very long time. Then you have Jay-Z come with Bacardi with this JV, and they are able to take so much market share that they move into the number 3 spot. They literally bump Courvoisier out. And that is not something that anybody ever thought possible. So we watched this happen and thought, wow, that's extraordinary. That means that you can come into the cognac business and do something. But the moment that Jay sued Bacardi, I knew, okay, there's an opportunity here. And the reason that the opportunity matters specifically for me is that most people don't realize that all of the cognac in the world comes from one small region around cognac. The city of Cognac is the namesake, but then the region around it, the Charente, the region around it is where all of the cognac in the world comes from. France only keeps 3% of cognac. 97% goes into the rest of the world. Well, of that 97%, 56% of it comes to America. The second largest country that receives cognac or that imports cognac is China, and they're only at 19%. We're at 56. Then you come inside of America, and 54% of that is consumed by Black Americans. 19% of it is consumed by Black Latinos. And when we say Black Latinos, that means Dominican, Puerto Rican, everybody who listens to the same music that African Americans, that Black Americans listen to, hip hop, Afro beats, that type of style of music. They fall under Black Latino. They're different than Mexican. And so you have almost 75% of the consumption of cognac in the number one consumption country in the world, the number one market in the world, is consumed by Black people. and so we looked at that and said, there has never been a product delivered that was owned by someone who looks like the consumer. And so we went into cognac, and obviously I got on the ground, did my due diligence, and began collecting data. And I don't really go off of charts and graphs and the stuff that people analyze on paper. I don't do that. I'm boots on the ground. I go directly to people. I go directly to the consumer in a market, and I go directly to the retailers to find out what's really going on in that market. And it was very clear that there was an opening because the number one cognac maker in our country has only focused, for the most part, on one particular product. It's a 2-year-old product. It's very young. And it is something that Black people have decided they don't like anymore. We now have more money. We now have more buying power. And so we've traded up. And so when you see tequila and how that thing has gone through the roof, when you see the numbers as it relates to Black Americans and Black Latinos that are the ones that are consuming that super premium tequila market, the super premium vodka market, it's a big percentage. And so now there's an opening for a super premium cognac. And so we decided to step into that. So we went to cognac, and the first thing that I did was what we did here with building out Nearest Green Distillery, looking for the land to be able to bring people to a home place where we could tell the story. And and create raving fans, super fans. Nearest Green Distillery is now 7th most visited distillery in the world. And so we wanted to be able to do that if we were going to launch a cognac brand. And so Mr. Farino Martel of the Martel family owned the Martel estate, and he was ready to move on and to move away from the family business. And so he sold us the estate and the vineyards. And the process, I won't get into it, but the process of buying vineyards in cognac is not like you do buying vineyards in Napa Valley. You can't just go in and buy vineyards and buy a property that has vineyards. It goes through an entire legal process. And there is one person who ultimately decides whether or not they think that person will be good stewards of those cognac grapes. And thankfully for us, they did decide that we would be good stewards. They were excited about the brand and the proposal that we laid forth on the brand, our brand story. And obviously, it's not called Uncle Nearest Cognac. It's a completely new company that just falls under the Uncle Nearest umbrella. And they were excited about it. The mayor was excited. The president of Grand Champagne was excited. And so we are moving forward, and we're now we bought the vineyards next door as well. So we're now the largest Grand Champagne vineyard owner in the city of Cognac. And we were in Brittany, France a few weeks ago shooting the short film with Jeffrey Wright. He will again narrate this remarkable story of why cognac is consumed in America at a higher rate than everywhere else in the world, and why Americans will always treat cognac like it's one of their own. There's a reason for that, and the story has never been told, and so we get the honor of being able to share that.
Fawn has 2 more stops on her Love and Whiskey book tour, in Portland, Oregon on July 15th and St. Louis on the 24th, with another round of tour stops in the works for this fall. Thanks to Fawn Weaver for joining us this week on WhiskyCast In-Depth. It's brought to you by Lagavulin, an award-winning single malt scotch from Islay, world-renowned for its balanced, smoky, peaty taste. Discover Lagavulin's full lineup at malts.com. Let's kick off the What I'm Tasting This Week department with the Uncle Nearest Rye whiskey. This one is bottled at 50% ABV, and the nose has baking spices, honey, vanilla, and a hint of peaches. The taste has notes of cinnamon and clove, balanced by honey, vanilla, peaches, and just a hint of red apples. The finish is long and mellow with lingering spices, and I'm scoring the Uncle Nearest Rye whiskey a 92. Next up, let's look at the new Kilmorey single malt from Lag Distillery on the Isle of Arran. This whiskey is matured 100% in ex-bourbon barrels and is bottled at 46% ABV. The nose is peaty and phenolic with touches of heather, honey, dried fruits, and vanilla. The taste is peppery and peaty with notes of dried fruits, heather, honey, and vanilla, and the finish is long and smoky. I'm scoring the Lag Kilmorey single malt a 92. And finally, I received a sample of Lost Lantern's latest far-flung bourbon, which is blended from bourbons from several different states and bottled at 63.8% ABV. The nose has touches of toasted caramel, allspice, stone fruits, clover honey, and leather. The taste is thick and spicy with chili powder, black pepper, and allspice notes that fade slowly to reveal leather, tobacco, and honey. The finish is long and spicy. I'm scoring Lost Lantern's Far-Flung Bourbon 2 a 93. I'll be adding these whiskeys to our searchable list of more than 3,700 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
Every year, Dewar's, the official Scotch whiskey of the U.S. Open Championship, rolls out a special limited edition whiskey to celebrate that year's tournament. The 2024 championship wrapped up in June, but the 2024 Dewar's 19-year Pinehurst edition is available now, and you don't want to miss it. This year's 19-year whiskey is double-aged, then extra-matured in rye casks, offering a rich profile with notes of pear and heather honey. There's a hint of spice in there, too, along with a dusting of cinnamon and cocoa powder. It's a sensory delight for any true whiskey or golf fan. So trust me, my fellow aficionados, grab a bottle and enjoy a whiskey crafted with the same skill and precision that makes the U.S. Open legendary. Please drink responsibly. Copyright 2024. Dewar's Blended Scotch Whiskey, 46% alcohol by volume. Imported by John Dewar & Sons, Coral Gables, Florida.
Let's open up the WhiskyCast community app and see what people are talking about this week. Our community segment is presented by Waterford Whiskey. Got an email this week from Daniel Hoydal, the managing director of the Fair Isles Distillery in the Faroe Islands. Here's what he had to say. I listen to your great podcasts on my way to and from work and just love it. When listening to the episode about Glenwivis, which I visited last year, you ended the episode with asking for tips about similar projects, so I would like to make you aware of our project here on the remote Faroe Islands in the North Atlantic. We have 1,000-plus shareholders in 31 countries, so even if it must be one of the most remote distilleries in the world, we are also part of a global community. Maybe interesting for your podcast? Definitely interesting, and I'm following up with Daniel for a future episode. If you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, download the free WhiskyCast community app and join the conversation. You'll find it in your app store. You can also find us on X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, and the email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Our community segment is presented by Waterford Whiskey on the web at waterfordwhiskey.com.
That's the sound of our whiskey growing on Dunbell Farm, County Kilkenny. We know where every grain comes from. Only Irish barley, one farm, one terroir at a time. Waterford Whiskey, the most naturally flavoursome single malt.
Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Balcones Distilling. Did you know that when you're nosing and tasting a whiskey, you're using two different sets of senses in your nose? Cammie Newton has a great Substack article on this. When you nose a whiskey, you're using what's called orthonasal olfaction. But when you taste it, you're using retronasal olfaction as the aroma molecules work their way from your mouth back into your nasal cavity. Both types activate the same olfactory receptors in your nose, but your brain processes them differently. Neuroscientists believe orthonasal olfaction helps us find things that smell appealing to eat, while retronasal olfaction is linked with how much we enjoy the flavor of what we eat or drink, and helps encode the experience into memories. I've often noted that we all have different mental memories associated with flavors and aromas, and perhaps this is why. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Balcones Distilling, the original Texas whiskey at the forefront of the American single malt movement, exploring place and provenance with unique style whiskeys, ranging from the award-winning Texas One and Lineage American single malts to their Baby Blue straight corn whiskey and Texas Rye bottled in bond. Discover whiskey from a new perspective at balconesdistilling.com. That's all for this episode of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of past episodes that goes all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, or you can use the WhiskyCast community app. Download it today from the Apple or Google App Stores. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Ever wondered where Redbreast got its name? Well, let's go back to 1912 and be glad our bird-watching founder didn't spot the bar-tailed godwit that day.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
The 2024 release of Dewar's 19-Year-Old Champions Edition is out now, available at Dewars.com. Get it while you can and appreciate every double-aged rye cask finished dram. Please drink responsibly.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2024, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.